No, there we go. Mute all. Okay.
We're coming up to play.
Good morning and welcome to our worship service from the Unitarian Society of Northampton and Florence. I am Steve O'Day and I'm your Zoom host this morning, and I'm really glad to see you here. I'm also thrilled to welcome fellow UUs from the UU Church of Worcester. We were very happy to have a chance to worship with you 2 weeks ago, and we're glad that you are here with us this morning. We strive to be a congregation that welcomes people of all ages, races, religious beliefs, backgrounds, gender identities, and abilities. We belong to the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, and we are guided and inspired by its values and principles. Those values and principles move us to remember that we in Northampton inhabit unceded land of the Pecumtuck and Nipmuc peoples. Our values and principles remind us to acknowledge our responsibility to face all the painful legacies of dispossession and systemic racism that are part of our collective history, even as we affirm and celebrate the legacies that inspire us. We are here to support and celebrate one another and to renew ourselves with hope and gratitude and new resolve. If you are new or returning after a time away, welcome. We're very glad you're here. Please feel free to fill out a virtual visitor card. Doing that allows us to put you on our email contact list. There's also a link to the card in the chat. We ask that you remain muted throughout the service and turn off your videos except during the greeting, and that way the technology can work as smoothly as possible. We hope that you'll stay for social hour afterwards. It's a great way to engage in meaningful conversations with people you might not otherwise have met. And now we will begin our service.
Make clean our hearts within us. We have no new words to tell our stories, the thirst of our hearts, the sorrow and pain, the joys and illuminations. We are as little children walking along the seashore, admiring here and there a pebble for its beauty and shape, while all that would be, all that we would sense, all that we would feel, all that we would understand stretches out before us, boundless and unexplored. Let us be patient, that we may learn how to walk in the light which has been made so luminous by many who have gone before us in our journey. And now please join in saying the words to accompany lighting our chalice. May we walk in the light made luminous by those who have gone before us. May their words and example inspire us and sustain us on our way.
And now it is time for us to greet one another. You're invited to remain muted, but turn on your videos, wave, say hello. If you are new or you are new-ish and you would like to, please say hello and tell us where you are from. You can put that in the chat if you like.
So wonderful to see so many of you, and welcome, welcome everyone from Worcester. We're thrilled to have you. Unspotlight me, Steve. Rebecca. Thanks, everybody. I think we ask you now to turn off your videos because the technology works much better if we don't have so many videos on the screen. So it's great to see you all, and I hope many of you will come back for coffee hour or tea hour or whatever it is you're having when the service is over. Normally at this time in our service we would have a story, and our plan was all along for our Director of Faith Formation and Community Engagement, Jessica, to have this Sunday off. So we don't have religious education activities today. But some of you know, and many of you don't, that Jessica and her wife Maggie have just become foster parents to newborn twins. And so chances are we are not going to see her for a little bit, and we're really excited for her and thrilled, and you'll learn a little bit more about that. But it happened very suddenly last week, and everybody's doing well. Our first reading is going to be some excerpts from meditation, diaries, and some letters by Etty Hillesum. And I'm going to give you some background. Etty Hillesum was born in 1914 and died in 1943. She was a Jewish woman from Middelburg in the Netherlands, and she died at Auschwitz. Diaries that she kept during the 2.5 years before her death were published in the 1980s, and they reveal her psychological development, her emotional development, and her mystical awakening, and then her experiences during that unspeakable time. When she began her diaries, she was living in Amsterdam, studying, tutoring Russian and other Slavic languages. She was a very independent woman, unusual for her time, in many ways not of her time. She had a love relationship with the widowed head of the household where she lived and served as a housekeeper, while also being a student and a teacher. She also became the lover of a rather unconventional, charismatic practitioner of psychoanalysis, whom she first knew as his patient and then served as his secretary. And she had a third or fourth job as the secretary to the Amsterdam Jewish Council, or Judenrat. And for them, she typed correspondence, and later she worked at the transit camp at Westerbork, which was in the northeast part of the Netherlands, near the German border. And that was where Jews were sent before being moved further east to concentration camps. So as in the rest of Nazi-controlled Europe, the Amsterdam Jewish Council was run by prominent Jews, and its job was to help enforce restrictions and then to facilitate the clearing of all the Jews from the city. And its role is very controversial for lots of reasons. Many believe that the council members were initially unaware of the Nazis' real intentions, that they believed that they could help to alleviate some of the suffering caused by German anti-Semitism. They often, especially in the beginning, objected to the Nazi orders, but then they fulfilled them to the letter, thinking perhaps that doing that, cooperating, would eventually save more lives. Later, of course, they did know exactly what deportation meant, and maybe the men who ran the council still believed, despite the evidence, that they could do some good for a few. Maybe they hoped to save themselves. Nearly all of them ended up dying in the same way as their compatriots and fellow Jews when their work was over. In her diary and in her letters, Etty Hillesum records her developing insights about herself, her family, her responses to everything that's unfolding around her, and the blossoming and deepening of her spirituality and prayer life. And these are some excerpts. This is from June of 1941. Meditation, a quiet half hour within yourself, but it's not so simple. It has to be learned. A lot of unimportant inner litter and bits and pieces have to be swept out first. So let this be its aim, to turn one's innermost being into a vast empty plain, with none of that treacherous undergrowth to impede the view. So that something of God, and she puts God in quotation marks, can enter you, and something of love also. Just now, when I was sitting in the sun, my head leaning against the washtub, and sun on the strong, dark, still leafless branches of the chestnut tree, I had a very clear sense of the difference in me between then and now. In the past, I would sit like that quite often too. But I never before felt as I did this afternoon. In the past, I took in the tree and the sun with my intellect, and I wanted to put down in so many words why I found it so beautiful. Now I just let it happen. As I sat there, I bowed my head unconsciously as if to take in even more of that new feeling for life. A year later, Eddie is preparing to be sent to Westerbork as an employee of the Jewish Council to do what she can to advocate for people there, to help them write letters and appeals, to issue pleas for more blankets and food. At that time, she wrote, "Such words as God and death and suffering in eternity are best forgotten. We have to become as simple and wordless as the growing corn or the falling rain." And she writes, "Can I say with complete honesty, I hope they will send me to a labor camp so that I can do something for the 16-year-old girls who will also be going, so that I can reassure the distracted parents kept behind by saying, 'Don't worry, I'll look after them.' Ultimately, what matters most is to bear the pain, to cope with it and keep a small corner of one's soul unsullied." And later she wrote a prayer on a Sunday morning. She says, "I shall try to help you, God, to stop my strength ebbing away. One thing is becoming increasingly clear to me. You cannot help us. We must help you to help ourselves." And that is all that really matters, that we safeguard that little piece of you, God, in ourselves and perhaps in others as well. So she wasn't naive. She seems to have maintained a clear sense of purpose, even in all her moments of despair and doubt. And some of the most powerful things that she wrote were some letters when she herself was at Westerbork and was destined to stay there until she was shipped off to Auschwitz. She's been describing the chaos and horror as the people prepare themselves for boarding the transport cattle cars that will take them east. And she writes, "Tonight I shall be helping to dress babies and calm mothers, and that's all I can hope to do. I could almost curse myself, for we all know we're yielding up our sick and defenseless brothers and sisters to hunger, heat, cold, exposure, and destruction. And yet we dress them and escort them to the bare cattle cars. And if they can't walk, we carry them on stretchers." She talks about the German guards and says, "I looked at them each in turn from behind the safety of a window and have never been so frightened of anything in my life. I sank to my knees with the words that preside over human life. And God made man in his likeness." And she writes, "That passage spent a difficult morning with me." No words and images are adequate to describe nights like these, but still I must try to convey something of it. One has the feeling of being the ears and eyes of a piece of Jewish history. And there is also a need sometimes to be a still, small voice. We must keep one another in touch with everything that happens in the various outposts of this world, each one contributing his own little piece of stone to that great mosaic that will take shape once the war is over. There must be someone to live through it all and bear witness to the fact that God lived even in these times. Now I invite you to sing with Booker and Greg and Chris and me the poem, the song Eli, Eli, which comes from a poem by Hannah Janesh, who was a special operations agent parachuted by the British, she was an Israeli, into Yugoslavia during World War II to help rescue Hungarian Jews who were about to be sent to Auschwitz. Shenish was arrested, imprisoned, and tortured, and she refused to reveal any details about her mission, and she died by firing squad. We'll sing first in Hebrew and then in English. You're up, Dave.
Good morning. I'm Dave Reutman, and this is the Social Justice Minute, which recognizes that our religion calls us powerfully to action on social justice and the environment. Our Social Justice Minutes often focus on practical action. This one focuses on questions. First, how will we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person while our political environment pushes us to demonize those who don't agree with us? Second, how will we affirm and promote the use of the democratic process within society when our country divides itself into two identity groups, each which views the other as working to destroy democracy? And third, how do we tackle these questions with patient discernment, even as the forces driving polarization harden the walls between us every day? Here's why this is so important to me. I grew up close to a dear uncle whose entire family was wiped out in Auschwitz, and with a father who suffered his entire life from nightmares resulting from fleeing those he called bandits and murderers during Russian pogroms. And I can only imagine how widespread fear, resentment, and hatred impacts people who don't have my white, male, and straight privileges. So I'm feeling a lot of urgency about easing the climate of polarization. And I fear in my guts as well as my heart the consequences if we continue down this polarization path. But even as I feel this urgency, I know that it will take time to find the right answers. When our USNF The Vote steering team met, we agreed that these are questions for the entire congregation to grapple with. I'm grateful to be in a community that's committed to using the democratic process to decide difficult questions. The racial justice team has been exploring how we can become skillful at dialogue, to see each other, as Martin Buber said, as thou, rather than only you, to rest together in a place of grace, even as we express our authentic ideas, which may be in conflict. This initiative from the racial justice team shines a clear light on the three questions I raised a minute ago. I know many of you are asking these questions too, and I know we will answer them together. I am looking forward to being part of this unfolding within this beloved community.
Thank you, Dave. It is serendipitous that much of what David had to share fits so well with the themes of the service this morning. And I think it speaks to how important the issues that he's mentioning and that we're talking about today are in this time. And that's why Dave, for those of you who do social justice minutes, got a special dispensation to go over the time limit. It's now time for our offering. Every week, we invite people to donate. Half of our donations go to organizations that our coordinating council has chosen to support within the community. Notably, today, I think the Movement Voter Project, which is doing such good work to try to continue to empower voters, particularly in Georgia. And we also appreciate your continued support for Arita Khakjiranova and her family. Arita took sanctuary with us in October of 2018. And now we'll enjoy our offertory anthem. Howard Thurman prayed, "Make clean our hearts within us." I invite you to hold this phrase in your attention as we spend some time in silence together. Make clean our hearts within us. Now we come back again to Howard Thurman. This comes from a collection of his more scholarly writings that were collected in a book called Luminous Darkness, published in 1965. At that time, he wrote, "The more the world becomes a neighborhood in which time and space are approaching zero as a limit, the more urgent becomes the issue of neighborliness. The walls of separation are crumbling, and the fact of that crumbling is deeply disturbing to those who have found the existence of the walls essential to their own peace, well-being, and security. The root of the evil, and evil it is in the human spirit. The law cannot deal with the human spirit directly. That is not within its universe of discourse. The walls that divide must be demolished. They must be cast down, destroyed, uprooted. There must be ceaseless and unrelenting pressure to that end, using all the resources of our common life. The barriers must be seen for what they are: the disease of our society, the enemy of human decency and humane respect. When the walls are down, it is then that the real work of building the healthy American society begins. Please join now in singing "There Is a Balm in Gilead." The evils of hatred, demonization, and degradation of one group of people by another are evils that rest within the human spirit. That was an understanding that both Eddie Hillesum and Howard Thurman reached. They saw it clearly. Their faith and spiritual practice provided inner resources, and they didn't let the power of evil deter them. We're going to turn up the sound. Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, thank you. I'll start over. Hatred, demonization, degradation of one group of people by another are evils that rest within the human spirit. This was an understanding both Eddie Hillesum and Howard Thurman came to. They saw it clearly, and they had faith and spiritual practices that provide rich inner resources that help them not let the power of that evil deter them. Hillesum wrote that Nazi barbarism evokes the same kind of barbarism in ourselves. We have to reject it. We must not fan the hatred within us, because if we do, the world will not be able to pull itself 1 inch further out of the mire. And Thurman wrote that his call to religious vocation is, quote, inseparable from a slowly emerging disclosure that my religious experience makes it possible for me to experience myself as a human being and to keep a very real psychological distance between myself and the hostilities of my environment. So for both of them, in different ways, but also in very similar ways, the faith and spiritual practices they had sustained them in what they faced and allowed them to see and bear witness and bear what they experienced. In his autobiography, Thurman described some of his formative experiences. His grandmother told the story of a slave preacher she heard on the plantation when she was a young girl. "You are not a slave," the preacher declared to the assembled Sunday crowd. "You are not," and he used the N-word, "you are a child of God." And as a young child, Thurman experienced the natural world with a sense of mystery and wonder. He had a special relationship with an oak tree at the edge of his yard, and he loved the night. He wrote, "The night was more than a companion. It was a presence, an articulate climate that seemed to cover my spirit like a gentle blanket." For both Thurman and Hillesum, faith and hope rested in their experience of oneness with all people, with the natural world, and with what they both called God. They might have understood what they called God in slightly different ways, but that was the word they used to describe it. And they were both highly educated, highly intelligent, scholarly at times, but their faith was a mystical one that was grounded in experience. It was reliant on feeling and intuition and appreciation rather than on their intellect. And of course, Howard Thurman's deep faith gave him the courage and conviction to make use of all his gifts throughout a very long life. He made his way out of the segregated South and into place after place where he was first, including at seminary. He was the first black man in many, many places in his life, and he paved the way for others. He left a written legacy of essays, meditations, autobiography, a work on Negro spirituals, and his book, Jesus and the Disinherited, which Martin Luther King carried with him on his travels. And as I've said before, one of his many triumphs was presiding over the marriage of our own Flora and Shanat Majumdar, and then later over the baptism of their daughter, Shari. Eddie Hillesum's biographer, Patrick Woodhouse, calls her a woman for our own time. Woodhouse wrote, "She interrupts our skepticism about faith and she invites us to believe again. She interrupts our narrow assumptions about religion itself and invites us to pray. She interrupts our easy hatreds of our enemy and invites us to see. And finally, she interrupts our despair about the future and she invites us to be courageous." So this is a time that we're going through, not just in the political and social environment, but also in our own lives, facing a whole winter where we are going to be restricted, where we're going to face loneliness and more hardship. What are the inner sources that you have, the inner resources to draw on? I've given you a little taste of Eddie Hillesum and of Howard Thurman, two who have gone before us, making the light more luminous. You all of us may find that also in one another. You may feel this is a time, I do, when we are all called to strengthen our inner resources for all the work we know we have to do, all the work that we know is crucial. And as Dave said earlier, there is much more to say and share about all of this, about the theology of I and thou, about plans for the winter, plans for the months and years beyond. So whether you're in Worcester or Northampton or Laguna Beach, we are working together, and we will keep the faith together in all the ways, all the many meanings that that has for us. Nearly 50 years ago, Howard Thurman wrote that the walls that divide must be cast down, destroyed, uprooted, that there must be ceaseless and unrelenting pressure to that end, using all the resources of our common life. And there's a beautiful song that was written a few years ago by the group Mammoose, and I think many of you have probably heard it by now. I was going to play it this morning, but I decided we will wait and sing it together when we're able to gather again. We will put a link to it if I remember. If you want to remind me, please do. Put a link to it in the Tuesday update for those of you who haven't heard it. And the words go, "We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change, alive from deep within the earth. It is time now that we thrive. It is time to lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love." And now I invite you to join again for our final hymn, our penultimate hymn, "Now Sing We of the Brave of Old." Let us take strength from the brave of old, and let us tell ourselves it is time now. May we each in our own way, whatever that is, be part of a great turning. May we learn to lead and to follow in love. Go in peace.
Dona nobis pacem, pacem. Dona nobis 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 pacem, pacem. Dona nobis pacem. Dona nobis pacem, pacem. Dona nobis pacem. Dona nobis pacem, pacem. Dona nobis 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 pacem.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Good morning again, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us for our service today. We've got social hour coming right up. So if you would like to join us for social hour, just stick around for a moment. We'll ask you to turn on your audio and your video now. If you have problems turning any of that on, it might be because we had to mute you during the service. I or my co-pilot, Rebecca, may have needed to mute you or turn your video off during the service. So if that happened, if you find you can't turn it on, just hit us up and we'll be glad to give you assistance getting into the breakout rooms. So I'm going to set up some breakout rooms. If you're heading out into the day, hope you have a fantastic day. And if you're sticking around for social hour, we are glad to see you. And we'll set that up in just one moment.